Happy Thursday. There's Marco D'Amico. I am Shaun Starr. Welcome to the Starr and D'Amico Show. Love this new branding. We love our sponsors, cheapesttshirts.ca, a proudly owned company. So you're thinking about branding, logoing for your company. You want fresh gear. You want same-day delivery. You want next-day delivery. You want to keep money in your pocket. Cheapesttshirts.ca is where you go, proud sponsor of the show. And, of course, your home away from home for all Montreal Canadiens games is McLean's Pub at 1210 Peel. No bad angle, great service, great pub food, and of course the home of Starr and D'Amico with our live show October 22nd. And don't forget, all your pets' needs handled with the precision and loving care of Chuck and his all-star staff at Little Bear, littlebearonline.com on St. Catherine across from Westmount Square. They love your pet as much as you do, proudly locally owned and operated. Marco, good to see you, brother. Welcome to a couple of days between games after that wildness from Quebec City. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Lane Hutson's future with the Montreal Canadiens in the aftermath of Luke Hughes getting his. So let's start with your impressions. $9 million AAV for the stud defenseman for New Jersey. Your reaction to the contract that finally got signed?
I think the New Jersey Devils were backed up into a corner, and it shows because I think Pat Brisson and CA did a fantastic job in negotiating this contract. I think that ultimately when you look at how he was able to bring this about, I thought 8 times 9 was a very difficult ask. To get 7 times 9 is a massive, massive win. And I think you owe the assist on the play, pun intended, to the Hughes brothers in this situation. The fact that the Hughes brothers want to play together and have made it no joke, and it's all quite up in the air and not very much any, ambiguity to it. They want to play together at one point. You have one signed for 5 more years. You lock this down for 7 in Luke, and now you're primed in the right position to make a move eventually for a Quinn Hughes. Should he hit the market or make a trade for him? Should things come down the way that Vancouver would want to do in case they lose him for nothing. So the way that I see it, this isn't a contract strictly for Luke Hughes. This is a Luke Hughes contract with the intent of keeping all the Hugheses happy and in New Jersey's line of sight.
So is it, listening to that, if I riff off your point of view, did the Devils overpay a smidge just to keep everybody happy here? And what does that mean for Lane Hutson? Because I don't think Ken Hughes feels the pressure, to your point about the Hughes camp. I can buy into that narrative, but that doesn't apply to Lane Hutson and the Montreal Canadiens. So how much do you think they paid for Luke Hughes, who has points of 47 and 44 in back-to-back campaigns and obviously missed 11 games last year?
Yeah, those are extremely good numbers. Let's not kid ourselves. That's a 55-point pace. That's excellent.
Yeah. No, he's a fine player.
Yeah. He's going to be one of the premier offensive defensemen in the NHL. Let's call a spade a spade. But I think Lane Hutson is a level above, And so I think everybody recognizes that, which is why everybody's asking the question, well, now what? Why did the Canadiens run to sign a deal beforehand? Simply put, the Canadiens made one offer to Lane Hutson since the beginning of the summer and have been comfortable to sit on it. Not because, they think he doesn't deserve it, just because Lane Hutson's got 1 season under his belt. It's not like the other players on the team, for example, like Juraj Slafkovsky, who had 2. Caden Gooley had a couple as well, 2. Cole Caulfield had 3. He signed at the end of the 3rd season. And so on and so forth, right? Sometimes you bank on it, sometimes you don't, but it's got to be worthwhile. So when you look at a guy like Lane Hutson, I think everybody agrees it's worthwhile, but it's a different negotiation situation organizationally, individually, and from a just like when you're looking at the league, it's a little bit of a different situation. So let's break this all down. Tom Fitzgerald, the general manager of the New Jersey Devils, is on, it's in a rocky situation, right? He's got to deliver results. So he's under a significant amount of pressure to maintain this team as it is. Now, the problem with the Devils this year is they absolutely need to make the playoffs. But could you imagine if this dragged into the regular season when they're already losing? They already have Jonathan Kovacevic that is out for the beginning of the season, and I believe Siegenthaler is also injured now. So 2 top 4, top 5 defensemen for them out for the count. Dougie Hamilton could go down at any moment based on his injury history, right? So, Luke Hughes is your constant here to start the season without him, the same way that the Ducks couldn't start the season without Mason McTavish if they wanted to make the playoffs. Here we are in the same situation. So that is number 1. Number 2, league-wide, we talked about it. It's the Hughes factor, right? They gave Luke Hughes what he wanted to sign the longest amount of time because that gives them the most amount of leverage. When Quinn Hughes will be set to become an unrestricted free agent, the other 2 Hughes brothers will be locked to New Jersey, and that gives New Jersey all the leverage in the world to be able to execute a trade or being able to secure him via free agency. That's number 2. That's why you give a little bit of money to keep him there 7 years instead of 5. And then lastly, you look at the fact that Luke Hughes has played 2 seasons as opposed to 1. There's value in that in the sense that that it's repeatable. And in fact, he improved his point per game pace in year 2. So there is progress there. And, once Dougie Hamilton is removed from the equation, he will be that team's number 1 defenseman until, of course, they bring in Quinn Hughes if and when. And so that changes the dynamic as well. Now, Lane Hutson, different situation. Same kind of same structure, right? So 10.2C RFA, which means they're ineligible for offer sheets, ineligible for arbitration. So basically, Lane Hutson, other than his on-ice play, doesn't have much leverage. Not as much as someone like Mason McTavish did, for example, who I found undersold. But when you look at the difference between Lane and Jack and Luke, for example, imagine if the Canadiens had all the Hudson brothers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then that's a different combination.
Yeah, we're back to that pressure point. Yeah, exactly.
It's a different leverage point. That's not the case, right? So there's not that. Kent Hughes is not only in the driver's seat. The Canadiens are on the verge of extending his contract, so he is more than comfortable in his situation and doesn't have to give into pressure in any way, shape, or form here. And then lastly, all the pressure, all of the push to have this signed earlier is a desire of Lane Hutson's, right? He wants to get this out of the way first. So the Canadiens, being Kent Hughes being the former agent that he is, will probably try to use that to his advantage in these negotiations. So now we've set up the portrait. Shaun, I think we have to get to the question everybody wants to know, right?
Yes.
How much? How long?
Yes. And well, we've been pretty consistent when we've been speculating on this channel, you and I, about the messaging, right, about Lane Hutson's very strong desire to stay here and stay here long term, right? Yeah. But that, I'm still left with, and again, the many reasons why I'm not a top level executive in control of an NHL team is that, like, when I see Lane Hutson, right, I see how much work, I see the care, I see the production, and even just in the preseason, right, all the work he did on his shot, boom, he's got 2 goals. I see a more confident player for a guy who oozed confidence before. I was just always kind of a little confused about what's taken so long. Why do you need someone else to set the market when you know who you have? You know how special 48 is and the high ceiling he has yet to hit. So, like, there's no debate. At least I don't think. Would you rate your level of surprise that the Canadiens and Lane Hutson come to terms on a 5-year, $9 million deal? I mean, the 5 years. Rate your level of surprise if that were to be like a 10. Would you be a 10?
I would be an 11 if it were a 5-year deal. I would be an 11.
So you're expecting 8 years? No, forget about the price point. We'll get to that, but it's the 8 years, right?
I think that it'll be anywhere between 6 to 8.
Okay,
my 2 cents.
Yeah,
you have to go and get more than 1 unrestricted free agency year. You have to at least get 2 if you're Kent Hughes, to a maximum of 4. Right? You have to. And just so everybody understands what I'm talking about, Lane Hutson, as a restricted free agent, can only become an unrestricted free agent after he is either at the age of 27 or has completed 7 NHL seasons, whichever one comes first.
Right.
he came into the league at 20 years old. So naturally, 7 years after that is when he would then become an unrestricted free agent. That's in 4 years' time after the end of this season. So 2026, 2030 is when he would become an unrestricted free agent. So if you're buying beyond that, it's going to cost you a little bit more. That's why Noah Dobson cost you $9.5 million, even though I think, you can make a very easy, arguable case that Lane Hutson will probably be a better defenseman than Noah Dobson by the time his contract kicks in. And if that's the case, then you got to look at the differences, right? And it's unrestricted free agent years, because in Dobson's contract, there's an 8-year deal, but only one of those 8 years is RFA years. The rest is you bought his free agency. You bought his prime. And that is what we're talking about here. So with Lane Hutson, I've always made this prediction. We've always talked about the contract comparable being Brock Faber. Brock Faber signed an $8.5 million deal over 8 years at a time where the cap was flat, or at least flattish. That number is irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant to an agent now that the salary cap is going up is how much does $8.5 million at the time of signing take up in percentage of the salary cap? And the answer to that was, at the time of the signing, it was worth 8.9% of the salary cap. 8.9% of today's or next season's salary cap is $9.25 million.
Yeah. And what about 3 years from now? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's it. But you're negotiating today.
Yes.
Right? And so
that's why it gets better.
That's why you're right. And so that's why this is why I get into this. When you look at Luke Hughes, they're obviously negotiating long-term. He's got leverage. He's got this. He's got that. I understand. When you're looking at the Canadiens aren't necessarily going to play a very aggressive game here. I feel like the Luke Hughes contract is going to be a serious conversation starter or heater, I would say, between both camps to maybe recharge this and kind of get a contract down and maybe sign before the start of the season, which is something that Lane Hutson would very much want before the start of the year. But at the same time, you also have to factor in that there is a hierarchy and that Lane Hutson himself is also a player that would want to stay here long term. The Canadiens would prefer an 8-year deal as well.
Sure.
Most teams would. Yeah. In fact, I've been told by several agents that the NHLPA is openly telling players not to take 8-year deals. It's the reason they're eliminating it from the CBA in the first place. So that the agents are now using that. I'm not saying it's necessarily Lane Hutson's agent. We've seen other agents do this, but use the 8th year to really drive up that AAV. And I think we all saw it happen with Kirill Kaprizov signing $16 million. So where are we at here? My prediction has always been between 9 and 9.5 over 8 years. That's what I believe. Now, does the Luke Hughes contract maybe limit, the term from 8 to 7? Perhaps. They signed Caden Gooley to 6 years. I don't think the Canadiens are inelastic when it comes to term, but that AAV has to make sense, because I have -2 on a scale of worry, -2 worry that Lane Hutson will not be a Montreal Canadien for a very, very, very long time.
Totally.
Not worried whatsoever. So, and one of the things I'll say, Shaun, that I know is that in that dressing room, they're not worried about getting top dollar each. They're not. You see, like Cole Caulfield took less specifically because he wanted to make less than Nick Suzuki. Same thing with Juraj Slafkovsky. Now you bring in a guy like Dobson. Lane Hutson is not in this game to make the most amount of buck possible. Is he probably worth $10 to $11 million?
Oh, yes.
My 2 cents?
Yes.
On an open market, without the conditions that he's in, without being a 10.2 CRFA, probably. But market factors, the human being himself and the environment that he's in, I would not be surprised if it were a single-digit number in terms of his salary. So that means less than $10 million when he signs a long-term contract with the Canadiens.
Well, that's why, I'm not a big fan of the Wild's decision to go all in on Kirill Kaprizov. I understand that it's good business for them. I get it. I get the no choice option, right? But it's reminiscent in my way of like when Carey Price got his. Carey Price was the one star of the Montreal Canadiens. Like you're paying to keep your version of Connor McDavid. Carey Price to me is a Hall of Famer all day, every day. He was the star of this team, right? And so when you go through the lineup of Nick Suzuki, Juraj Slafkovsky gets his, Cole Caulfield, to your point, takes less, right? Ivan Demidov will be the next up on the ladder. Noah Dobson at 9.5. All I'm saying is I much prefer to build my hockey club the way the Montreal Canadiens are putting it together. And I think to your point, I'm not surprised to hear that point of view about Lane Hutson, because I don't think in all my years covering the Montreal Canadiens, I've never seen a more publicly tight group than this one. And they really haven't won anything. You know, they defied the odds and made the playoffs last year. That's a huge thing. But my last point before we end today is watching the Canadiens on a Tuesday in Quebec City and listening to the commentators on the broadcast really put Jake Sanderson of the Ottawa Senators over. Like, yes, he's a phenomenal defenseman. He's a great player, plays both sides of the blue line exceptionally well. But Sanderson's in at $64.4 million, just over $8 million AAV. Like Lane, I mean, I always hear and read about that's the comp. So the landing spot is going to be somewhere between Sanderson and Noah Dobson, right? Which takes me, Lane Hutson's going to get a $9 million, $9.2 million contract. I think that's the landing spot that makes logical sense based on precedent and based on what Lane has done.
If you look at the cap percentage of Jake Sanderson, it's 9.15%.
Right.
That's $9.4 million on an 8-year deal in next year's salary cap. So yeah, it would be very consistent. And to me, that is the comp because he signed after 1 year.
Yeah.
And Ottawa always has to overpay a smidgen because I'm sorry, Ottawa, but not everybody wants to play there. Yeah, not everybody wants to play there. The team's been constructed moderately well, and you got stuff to look forward to and being in the playoffs. But as it comes to a destination, you always got to give a little bit more, a little earlier, just to make sure that you have these guys signed. And now Sanderson is on a steal of a deal for the next 7 years. So it worked out. What I will say, though, and I think what really kind of brings me to this point, we're realistically here, we're talking about between $9 and $10 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will be so irrelevant to the Canadiens' fiscal structure when we get to like 2027. So irrelevant. You know, as long as it's under 10, I think all Canadiens fans should rejoice. And I think that Kent Hughes has shown an ability to be able to bring down salary demands. I mean, Caden Gooley at 5.5, even though the market dictated he deserved 7, the Canadiens brought him down because of the injury concerns. You know, you look at Juraj Slafkovsky, first overall pick, with the way that he finished that second season, he had the same trajectory in points then, not now, as Mikko Rantanen, and that could have been a monster contract, but decided to bring it under Nick Suzuki. And even Noah Dobson. Noah Dobson was asking for $11 million and then brought it down to 10.5 at the very, very last end as a ditch effort, and then accepted a trade to Montreal and took less from that and signed at 9.5 for 8 years. So just to give you an idea, I would put a little bit more faith on Kent Hughes' ability to negotiate and the goodwill of a player like Lane Hutson, who just wants to play in this environment unencumbered by the fact that he's got a monkey on his back in the form of his contract negotiations.
That's Marco D'Amico. You can follow him at MN D'Amico. The road to 20,000 subscribers begins with you guys. Thank you so much. And you can support us by supporting our sponsors at cheapesttshirts.ca. McLean's Pub will be there live October 22nd ahead of the Calgary Flames and Habs regular season matchup. And our friends at Little Bear at littlebearonline.com with delivery and curbside pickup. Make sure you're back tomorrow as we take a deeper dive into the Montreal Canadiens roster and we make our picks. Who's going to break camp? Who's starting for Martin St. Louis squad in Toronto, October the 8th? Marco, thanks as always, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, everybody.